Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. My name is Adam-Antium and welcome to this edition of AAUTZM Podcasts. I hope everyone out there is feeling well and having a good time doing whatever and whoever you may be doing. Just the usual announcement for those of you listening to this on YouTube right now. My podcasts also exist on talkshoe.com. The link to the TalkShoe page is in the video description down below, so just for those of you who wanted to listen to or download the full 60-minute podcast for free in MP3 format. I know I hear from a lot of my fans that they like to download my MP3s, put them on their iPod or such device and listen to my droning on while they're doing their household chores and driving. Even though, that sounds like a fate worse than death, but never mind. For those of you who are driving right now while listening to this, please pay attention to the road. But anyway, just one more announcement. I've actually begun the initial stages of creating my first documentary. Ooh. The working title for it at the moment is Life on the Soapbox. I figured that my police videos are now so long that it's just me prattling on the camcorder, so I dare say I'm more than capable of creating a 90-minute documentary. I mean, I guess the challenging thing isn't going to be coming up with material, but the lengthy and complicated editing process. And for those of you who are filmmakers, then you'll know, and I will know eventually. It's essentially a documentary about my own struggles with my activism, along with some interesting insights into what activism is and what it means in our modern society. I mean, the reason why I feel this announcement is pertinent to this podcast is because they both run in pretty much the same vein. And so feel privileged that I've decided to do this podcast now, because some of what you'll hear on this edition will appear in my documentary. So I guess in a sense I'm providing you with an audio sneak peek, as it were. But anyway, on to the podcast in hand, which, as you can see, I have entitled The Importance of Being Activist. Obviously grammatically incorrect, but that will be because it's a play on words of the importance of being earnest. But just wanted it to give it an activist feel. Essentially, I'm going to be talking about activism, what it is, how important it is, why we need to be pushing ourselves towards those ends. But let's first define activism. I mean, the Oxford Dictionary defines activism as activism, noun, mass noun, the policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. Okay, fair enough. Personally, I would define activism as just the word we've assigned to the position of being a well-informed, well-intentioned, decent, progressive and responsible human being. Now, this resultant mindset can manifest in many, many ways. To most of society, we're just used to these activists being those rowdy and violent people we see on the news who might cause damage, noise and general trouble for governments and police forces, right? Well, while there can't be any denying that this is true for a certain percentage of the activist community, it's not those kind of individuals who I'm here today to speak of. In my eyes, they're not activists. They're just destroyers, in a sense. It is those in our society who are willing and able to show and embody their altruism towards humanity and our future by means of peaceful non-compliance, lawful rebellion, direct action and volunteer efforts that benefits others over themselves. Now, let's go through first off some effects of activism on the world. The first one that immediately comes to my mind really is in the spectrum of human rights. I mean, activism has been without a doubt the largest and most pivotal genesis point of the vast majority of the human rights that have been placed into law. You know, from the European Convention of Human Rights to the shift in cultural perception to consider ethnic minorities and individuals of differing gender and sexual orientation as equal human beings. I mean, granted, we aren't all the way there with those cultural perceptions. However, think about how far we would be if no one ever piped up and demanded to be treated equally and fairly. Think about the kinds of abuses these people would still be suffering if not only them, but also the oppressing race or class decided to stop abusing them and look beneath the surface and see that we are all the same. Let's go on to some cultural reactions to activism. I mean, the interesting thing about activists is the reaction they receive from culture. I mean, while largely derogatory and dismissive in nature, this actually speaks volumes, not so much about the activists themselves, but rather the zeitgeist, if you will, of the culture they have emerged from and attempting to influence a shift from. A key phrase in this equation would be expectation. Modern culture creates expectations of its populace to reinforce the incentive to toe the line, as it were, and thus keep the culture going in its current form. However, there has emerged a certain amount of allowances from culture which have been provided as limits of acceptability, and thus expectations upon activists. For instance, if you wish to advocate a better world and be taken seriously by those who still support the current system, then you must have the following boxes ticked. Number 1, be employed and thus have an equitable income. Number 2, grow all your own food or at least buy local and organic produce. Number 3, no rich mum and daddy. Number 4, no debts. Number 5, no criminal record. Number 6, no personal electronics from Apple. Number 7, willingness to be transparent about anything in their life, regardless. I mean, the list goes on and on. Eventually, the conditions of expectation became ridiculously unapplicable. Not only has the mistake been made to create expectations in the first place, but also because of a paranoid double standard of supporting the system or not supporting the system. It was somehow decided to create these pitfalls around a very narrow band of social, financial and behavioural standing that was virtually impossible for any activist to meet, let alone stay within. And as a result, the second any activist could be caught out for falling into one of these many traps, the self-appointed guardians of the status quo could instantly point the finger of accusation and use that fallacy to discredit anything about the activist. An example of how this can work occurred on an online article that detailed my recent arrest. There was one individual who, by the way, I've since realised was an ex of mine, how poetic, was demanding that I publicise my financial and economic details purely because I have chosen to pursue activism with the public. Besides my repeated attempts to get through to her that such a thing is completely irrelevant, not just to the article at hand, but also irrelevant and illegal outright, considering that Article 8 of the Human Rights Act states, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home and his correspondence," end quote. She was having none of it, and still blindly pushed this fallacy, so by the end of it I was forced to have to make the following rebuttal to these demands of transparency. Quote, This is going to be my last message to you, since you have demonstrated a belligerent obsession with my social standing and think it is relevant to anything, which I will make my last case to prove to you how it is really not relevant. Here we go. You say I'm a hypocrite for advocating a new socio-economic model while supposedly living out of my parents' wallet. Now, let's think about this idea, shall we? What difference in your mind is there between that and, say, sofa surfing with friends, subletting and so forth? You would still class those as leeching from people, so let's move on to some other means of living. Being unemployed gets me labelled as a hypocrite by you because I would be living off state benefits, even though I'm not actually saying on the megaphone, don't live on state benefits as part of my worldview advocation, so that cannot make me a hypocrite. If I was admonishing unemployed people for leeching off the state, then I would be a hypocrite. Also, being employed gets me labelled as a hypocrite, because you would say that I'm supporting the existing structure that I hate so much. Also, having my own flat or house share or house, you would say I'm being a hypocrite because I'm still supporting the system of money, and thus must be a hypocrite to advocate a system without the need for it. Living on disability with a physical or psychological handicap, you would say I'm still a hypocrite because I'm living off state benefits. Again, I'm not admonishing people for being handicapped. So how this makes me a hypocrite, I do not know. If I was living off luxurious inherited wealth and thus didn't need to work, you would say I'm a hypocrite because I live off what I've inherited and I should use that money to build my La La Land fairy tale. The only way I could live that would stop you from trying to put the hypocrite label on me is if I lived in an off-grid Earthship. But even then, you even agreed that that wouldn't suddenly and magically give my arguments merit, and I can surmise that someone like you would still have the derogatory attacks such as, well, you don't even live in the system of money. What the hell do you know? Stop living in La La Land and join the real world, hippie. So there is no social standing in existence which you will not attempt to use some irrelevant, spiteful rhetoric to use in a pathetic attempt to discredit me. In your eyes, I can do nothing to be taken seriously by you. And this is exactly why you do it. Because you can't bear to consider that someone who advocates a new system could have any point whatsoever. So what do you have to do? Use anything you can to attempt to discredit him. This is something I fully realise and accept, because it is individuals like you who I'm not out to convince, because you won't allow yourself to be convinced by anything. You want to know why that is? To stop you from being able to think. To stop you from having to look critically at this world and realise we need to change course somehow in order to survive. I mean, you're already part of the way there. You recognise that the capitalist system isn't sustainable, but that's as far as it goes in what you publicly admit. So tell me, since you freely admit that the current system isn't sustainable, what solution do you agree with, without attempting to personally attack and discredit its proponents? Maybe in private you do think further about it, but as for what you acknowledge in public,